You were here last week, you know that we began a series on fear, and this song we've been using last week, this week, we'll be using it every week to kind of remind us. It's kind of building some momentum about what we're trying to do. Last week we talked about knowing fear, no fear, that no, N-O, and the K-N-O-W. There's a good kind, a bad kind, and we talked a little bit about that. We talked about finding and refining. In other words, finding out our fears and refining them and making them something that we can handle. Today we talk about facing it and ultimately erasing it. Arthur Christopher Benson says the worst sorrows in life are not in its losses and misfortunes, as bad as those may seem, but rather it's in its fears. And so we are learning not to simply find our fear, but to face it, to refine it, and to erase it. So we're going to live with that tension that I mentioned to you last week. If you got your folder, want to follow along. The tension is the guardrails we've talked about in this series are going to be the two scriptures from Psalm and from 1 John. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. In other words, there is a good kind of fear. There is a reminder that there are things in our world that are worth fearing. And certainly fear, or as in reverence toward God, is certainly one of those. But also perfect love casts out, drives out fear. In other words, when we are engaged with Christ and we know the perfection of His love for us, not that we will ever perfectly love Him back this side of heaven, but when that perfect love encounters us, it drives that fear from our lives. We talked about the word perspective last week and defined it as the ability to see, to sort, and to sense what's going on. So what is it in your life? What fear has sneaked its way into your life this week? And what perspective do you need to bring to that fear? Where you sense and you sort out and you make some sense of what it means to look through that, to refine that fear, and ultimately to erase that fear. Sociologist by the name of Bernard Glassner has written a book, and he calls it The Culture of Fear. He says this. He says, we live in a culture of fear. We're the most worried society that's ever lived. For instance, life expectancy has doubled in the 20th century, at least in our country. We are able to cure more diseases than any time in the history of the world. No group of human beings has been healthier. But at the same time, no group of human beings has been more worried about their health. How does he know that? Well, some folks took 3 newspapers and they monitored them for a while, and they looked at all the health articles in these 3 newspapers, Washington Post, USA Today, and New York Times. And they discovered that in that particular time, there were 59 million Americans, at least from the statistics given in the articles on health. This is the statistics they came away with. There were 59 million Americans with heart disease. There are 53 million who suffer from migraines. There are 25 million from osteoporosis, and there are 16 million who have obesity. And there are, I think, another 50-something million with cancer, 12 million with severe disorders like brain injuries. So in other words, when they totaled it up, there were 543 million people who are seriously ill out of 266 million people. So you see, we have a sense of just, yeah, could somebody have a couple of those? Possibly, sure. But we really do have exaggeration of how bad it really is. Let me give you one more statistic and we'll move on. In an 8-year period, they monitored murder rates across the United States, and they dropped 20% in this 9-year period. But murder stories that the news were reporting increased 600%. So you see where we are. It's not just the media. It is, we have learned it in our families. Think about it. When you were growing up, did your mother say to you, take risks, honey, embrace danger, look only one way when you cross the street? No. We warn our kids from the very beginning, be careful out there. It's scary. It's a dangerous world. But I found the answer to all of this. It's on a little poster, and it says, worrying works. I think you're going to see it. Worrying works. 90% of the things I worry about never happen. Now, isn't that the solution that you've been looking for? That's not real, okay? That's not funny. I mean, it's funny, but you don't want to do that. So it's hard to live beyond fear. I know that, recognize it, not only because we live in a culture of fear, but because of our own backgrounds. There's another factor, and you know me, I found it. Some of us are psychologically wired. In other words, we are hardwired to fear. Some of us are more fearful than others. You know how I know? Because we have a worry gene. I almost put one of those chromosome pictures up there that you have in biology class, but since I couldn't explain it to you, I didn't want to be embarrassed. So I didn't put it up there, but for those of you who want to mark down this very serious number and look it up, it's the SLC6A4 gene on the chromosome 17q12. Some of your eyes are going like this, I see that. But what they basically mean is when people have a shorter version of that particular gene that I just mentioned to you, then you have a tendency toward worry. Now, I know what many of you are thinking right now. I'm wondering if I have that shorter version of that gene. No, don't. But we do. We have a tendency. Some of us are hardwired for that. So given our world and our culture and our wiring patterns, it's not easy not to drift into fear. Fear is generally an increased sense of being vulnerable and a diminished sense of having power. Now, when's the last time you felt that? Well, Bob Wilder felt it today when he was driving the bus and he was in the trailer park and a ladder came out and knocked two of the windows out of the bus. Now, that's vulnerability. He was particularly vulnerable when the gentleman came out and chatted with him in four-letter words. Yes, all the kids' ears were there. How many of the kids here were in the bus this morning? Yep, I see all of it. Lord, erase that from their memory. But that's feeling a sense of loss of power, isn't it? It's a loss of power, particularly when he needs the insurance card and it's not in the bus, and he calls me for it, and I send him the one for the other bus. That's an increased sense of vulnerability. God says to Isaiah what you and I need to hear, fear not. And this might be one of those passages that you ought to memorize during these 4 weeks. Fear not, for what? I have redeemed you. I have called you by name, which means that you're mine. When you pass through the waters, you will not be destroyed. When you pass through the rivers, I will be with you. When you walk in the fire, you will not be burned. Do not be afraid. I am with you. Not bad to remember, is it? But just hearing information that God is present is really not enough sometimes because we feel overcome by the patterns of fear. So to become what I would call a faithful fear manager, we need to work through what I would call the stages of fear. Here they are. There are 3 stages of fear. It begins with distortion. If you're fearful, there is some distortion going on about what you're seeing. It is a distortion of how things are. Fear starts with this simple distortion of a truth. Fear is intended to be a kind of self-correcting response to understand that distortion. Now, I'll get more to it, but let's finish the 3 points. Secondly, it begins with distortion, and if it's not taken care of, it becomes chronic. You know that word? It means it's ongoing, it's grinding, it's perpetual. Let me give you the idea. How about if you have a pinched nerve in your neck? And that just kind of tweezes once in a while. It kind of gets your information, you start thinking about it. It's a distortion of what it's supposed to be in there. And so there's this little distortion going on. Oh, it's not that big of a deal. It's just a little tweak there. And you don't get the tweak fixed. And you start favoring your neck, and you don't turn all the way around. And so you begin doing this. Hey, how you doing? Oh, hey, how you doing? Okay. How many of you ever worn those neck braces? Is that the most pleasant thing you've ever been in your life? Well, what happens is it becomes chronic and ultimately becomes, number 3, toxic, to where it controls you so much you have moved from distortion through that chronic feeling now to toxic. In other words, you have been so damaged by that little pinched nerve that you're no longer able to work, to function. How many of you love to kill weeds? I mean, it's not just like you like it. It's passion you have. It's my passion. I hate weeds. So I go to the local Crescent Springs hardware store and I say, I don't want your 6-shooter. I want your bazooka. I want something that'll blow these weeds out of my yard. Well, they get nervous. They hide behind the desk, and they're saying, what's he want? He wants to blow something up. That's what he's wanting. But no, I want this weed killer. And so I'll never forget yesterday, I was working, I wasn't working outside, I was looking outside, and so I saw the area that Neva and I had just weed killed, and they were coming up again. I saw 6 of them. Now, what do you think I'm doing this afternoon? Bazooka coming out, and we're going to kill them. Now, I say all that to say there is something about this poison that I use. If I dilute this poison with too much water, it doesn't make any difference. And so sometimes I don't dilute any of it. Don't tell the people at the hardware store that I use it full strength. But I pull the guns out and I want to kill it. And that's what I would say to you about fear. We let our emotions get diluted with the wrong things if we're not careful. And the answer sometimes is almost too simple. If you're being overcome by fear and it's beginning to begin distorting your life and it's chronic and it begins to be toxic, you've got to suddenly start acting fearless. We have to act our way into being strong sometimes. Now, how do we do that? How do we avoid? Number 2 is there are 3 forms of avoidance. There are, first of all, avoidance by procrastination. Anybody done that lately? You just put it off and put it off. I have this new file system, and so, each day has a file, and so you put things in that file that you want to do that day. But the beautiful thing about this is you can put it in tomorrow's folder. Matter of fact, I discovered the other day, I can put it 3 months down the road from me. I won't even have to think about it until then. How many of you put things off really bad? The only reason you should put something off, I've determined, is this: it's strategic. The only reason you should put something off is that, that this bill I don't need to pay right now because they may forgive that bill, that chance, but they may forgive that bill. Okay, I don't want to pay it anytime soon. I don't want to pay my taxes too soon because, they're not great with money, so I'll just hold on to it. There's something strategic about that. But most of the stuff we put off, we just need to do. We just need to decide to do. Avoid by procrastination. If you want to hear about somebody who majored in avoidance, it was Adam. Remember what Adam said? Adam says, God, I heard you in the garden, but I was afraid, so what did he do? He hid. Avoidance is also not only by procrastination, but it's by denial. How many people do you know who believe somehow that even though they have symptoms of cancer, if they ignore them long enough, it will go away? I mean, honestly, I know people who will not choose to deal with the symptoms in their lives because they somehow think that if you don't identify it, it will go away. They do it all the time. They watch TV, they take a drink, they change the subject. They somehow think that if they could just put it off by denying it, that it really is not true. Thirdly, avoidance by indecision. At the end of the day today, Neva knows that between 12 o'clock and about 6 o'clock, she could do or say anything to me, and I wouldn't even say anything back. Why? Because all my decisions for the day had been made by noon. I started my day very early, and by noon on Sunday, I'm one happy camper at noon. I mean, what do you want for dinner? I don't care. Give me $1 million. I don't care. I mean, you know, by that time of the day, I've decided I don't want to make any more decisions. It's indecision. Remember, A Few Good Men? Tom Cruise is the interrogating lawyer, and Jack Nicholson plays the classic crotchety old guy that's in the service all of his life. And he's on the witness stand, and Tom Cruise looks at him and says, I want the truth. And Jack Nicholson says, you can't handle the truth. I wonder how many of us believe that. The evil one has a way of saying to you through a set of circumstances that you can't handle the truth every day, and so you just spend your life avoiding it, not deciding to do anything about it, and so you just think you're going to decide how to live your life by indecision, and it's a horrible way to live. Let me say it as honestly as I can say it. Jesus said, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. What he's basically saying is there is no truth that you and Jesus cannot handle together. The story of Elijah, do you know that story? It's a great story. I've given you some chapters there you can read through and look at it. Elijah was a prophet, you remember. He had incredible courage, at least most of the time. But if you also know his story, you know he was led into idolatry by who? Queen Jezebel. Now, how many women do you know who go by the name of Jezebel? I don't know any Jezebels because of Miss Queen Jezebel. Queen Jezebel's husband was King Ahab, and they had an affiliation with a little cult called Baal. About 450 Baal prophets got in a little bit of a battle with the God of Elijah, and they lost. And after that, you'll remember that Elijah says, choose this day, how long will you waver between your two opinions? If Baal serves God, serve him. If the Lord is God, then serve him. And of course, he challenged them to have Baal to take action, and he prayed that God would take action. And the whole cult of Baal, what happened to them? They were destroyed. But whenever you have a real high moment in your life, watch out, because there's typically a low motion coming. Had this high moment of God in his life, and sure enough, he turns the corner, and Jezebel had sent Elijah a little message. What did that message sound like? She said, may the gods deliver severely with me if by tomorrow I don't have you killed. So Elijah has to decide to either face the fear or flee the fear. And you know what Elijah does, don't you? Elijah was afraid, so he ran for his life. When he comes to a place called Beersheba, he left his servant there, and he went for a day's journey out in the desert. It's always good to be alone when you're really dealing with God. He came to a broom tree, it says, and he sat down, and he prayed that he might in fact die. Poor me, he said, poor me. I have had enough, Lord. Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors. Now, underline that no better than my ancestors, because what that means is I am tied by the throat by my past, and I will never be able to escape it. And let me tell you, that's a lie from the devil, if you believe that. And so this is the ultimate fear. I have had enough. Remember the stages. Distortion leads to chronic, leads to toxic fear. And when he says, I am no better than my ancestors, he has become victim of the day. He says, I am just a victim of my chromosomes or my circumstances. Therefore, I'm stuck. But God said something different. It said as he sat there that day that the earth came and that the wind came and that the fire came, but God was in none of those things. But what was God in? The still, small voice. And Elijah felt that voice was saying, Elijah, you must go back the way you came. You have to go back down to that mountain, and you'll have to face the same set of problems that you had when you came up here. They're still there. Jezebel is still there. She's just as difficult as she ever was. Her personality has not proved. She has not gone to a Dale Carnegie course to improve herself. You have to go and you have to face her. And what is that principle? What is that principle? That principle is there is power in weakness when you are the weak one and God is the powerful one. So Elijah says to Ahab these words, "You and your wife Jezebel are headed on a direct course with destruction because of the evil that is in your heart. You are on a collision course with God, my friend." He came through it, didn't he? He faced his fear. There are 3 steps to managing fear, and we'll finish with these. 3 things that you can do today to manage your fear. First of all, activate your faith. Activate it. Move into it. Decide it. It's never going to get moving if you wait till you feel like it. You just have to lean into it. Have any of you ever gone snow skiing? Have you ever tried to lean backwards on your skis? It do not work. You got to lean forward. That is not a normal feeling, is it? First time I leaned forward, I said, no, my body is saying, do not do this. But you have to activate your faith. Secondly, be absolutely shameless in your resolve. Shameless in your resolve. How many of you have gone water skiing? Did you lean into your water skis? No. Did you lean back? Sure you did. My mother, I think I've told you, she bought a boat, and nobody in our family knew how to ski. Oh, get dumb Dan. Throw him out there with the skis. See if Mr. Karate can get up on them little sticks and run around this lake. I ate more water than any human being ought to have in his system. I got up on those skis. I think it was more ego than it was anything else, but I was going to get on those skis. And I was shameless in my resolve. Every time I got up and swallowed down another bunch of who knows what, I'm going to do this. Thirdly, never underestimate the power of willingness. When you will yourself, when you lean into you, when you activate your faith, when you decide by the power of God and your willingness to let Him, to will one thing is the essence of life, somebody has said. Frederick Buechner has a novel by the name of The Beast, The Final Beast. And he has one of his characters say this. He says, "It's enough to give you the Jim Willies the way most of people pray." He said, "I've always pictured Jesus standing there with his hands tied behind his back so he can't do a thing. You know why? Because they never will ask him to do a thing, at least a thing they really want. Because in their hearts, they refuse to believe that he really can do a thing. Oh, bang it into your heads. Ask and it shall be given. You know, but first ask. You don't have to be very bright to do that. Keep on asking and believing the best that you can. And don't worry about the little voice inside that says, I don't believe. Just pray it down. The Lord will hear you above it." Each week, we're going to end with that picture that I showed you last week. It's that little boy that's 2 years old, our Holden, who's at the zoo roaring at a tiger. Now, you need to know a couple things are going on there. First of all, when she sent that to me, I called child services on my daughter, but there is a window there. Two things are going on. He knows Mama's standing right over there, and he's been there before, and he's going to face it this day. So he just, without provocation, just leans in and roars back at that tiger. What is it today that you need to roar back to? It is tagging you. It is punching you. It is tailing you. It won't let go of you. It is a fear that is wallowing all over you, and it is keeping you from being what Christ wants you to be. Then roar at it and activate your faith and decide that fear will not own you. You're a child of God.